MTC. Unit 19, 1. No analysis. If you were afraid of standing on balconies, you would start on some lower floors and slowly work your way up to higher ones. It would be easy to face a fear of standing on high balconies in a way that's totally controlled. Socializing is trickier. People aren't like inanimate features of a building that you just have to be around to get used to. You have to interact with them, and their responses can be unpredictable. Your feelings toward them are more complex too. Most people's self-esteem isn't going to be affected that much if they don't like balconies, but your confidence can suffer if you can't socialize effectively. It's also harder to design a tidy way to gradually face many social fears. The social situations you need to expose yourself to may not be available when you want them, or they may not go well enough for you to sense that things are under control. The progression from one step to the next may not be clear, creating unavoidable large increases in difficulty from one to the next. People around you aren't robots that you can endlessly experiment with for your own purposes. This is not to say that facing your fears is pointless when socializing. The principles of gradual exposure are still very useful. The process of applying them is just messy, and knowing that before you start is helpful. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1. No 0102. The market's way of telling a firm about its failures is harsh and brief. Not only are complaints less expensive to handle, but they also can cause the seller to improve. The seller may learn something as well. I remember a cosmetics company that received complaints about sticky sunblock lotion. At the time, all such lotions were more or less sticky, so the risk of having customers buy products from a rival company was not great. But this was also an opportunity. The company managed to develop a product that was not sticky and captured 20% of the market in its first year. 2-0. Another company had the opposite problem. Its products were not sticky enough. The company was a Royal Post Office in Europe and the product was a stamp. Royal Post Office. The problem was that the stamp didn't stick to the envelope. Management contacted the stamp producer, who made it clear that if people just moistened the stamps properly, they would stick to any piece of paper. What to do? Management didn't take long to come to the conclusion that it would be more costly to try to educate its customers to wet each stamp rather than to add more glue. The stamp producer was told to add more glue and the problem didn't occur again. Since it is better for the firm to have buyers complain rather than go elsewhere, it is important to make it easier for dissatisfied customers to complain. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1. No 0304. As kids, we worked hard at learning to ride a bike. When we fell off, we got back on again, until it became second nature to us. 2. But when we try something new in our adult lives, we'll usually make just one attempt before judging whether it's worked. If we don't succeed the first time, or if it feels a little awkward, we'll tell ourselves it wasn't a success rather than giving it another shot. That's a shame, because repetition is central to the process of rewiring our brains. Consider the idea that your brain has a network of neurons. They will connect with each other whenever you remember to use a brain-friendly feedback technique. Those connections aren't very reliable at first, which may make your first efforts a little hit and miss. You might remember one of the steps involved, and not the others. But scientists have a saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. In other words, repetition of an action strengthens the connections between the neurons involved in that action. That means the more times you try using that new feedback technique, the more easily it will come to you when you need it. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1. No 0506. Like all humans, the first Homo species to begin the long difficult process of constructing a language from scratch almost certainly never said entirely what was on their minds. At the same time, these primitive hominins would not have simply made random sounds or gestures. Instead, they would have used means to communicate that they believed others would understand. And they also thought their hearers could fill in the gaps, and connect their knowledge of their culture and the world to interpret what was uttered. These are some of the reasons why the origins of human language cannot be effectively discussed unless conversation is placed at the top of the list of things to understand. Every aspect of human language has evolved, as have components of the human brain and body, to engage in conversation and social life. Language did not fully begin when the first hominid uttered the first word or sentence. It began in earnest only with the first conversation, which is both the source and the goal of language. Indeed, language changes lives. It builds society and expresses our highest aspirations, our basest thoughts, our emotions, and our philosophies of life. But all language is ultimately at the service of human interaction. Other components of language, things like grammar and stories, are secondary to conversation. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 0708. A bedroom temperature of around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, 18.3 C, is ideal for the sleep of most people, assuming standard bedding and clothing. 6.5, 18.3. This surprises many, as it sounds just a little too cold for comfort. Of course, that specific temperature will vary depending on the individual in question and their gender and age. But like calorie recommendations, it's a good target for the average human being. Most of us set bedroom temperatures higher than are ideal for good sleep, and this likely contributes to lower quantity and quality of sleep than you are otherwise capable of getting. Lower than 55 degrees Fahrenheit can be harmful rather than helpful to sleep, unless warm bedding or nightclothes are used. 5.5. However, most of us fall into the opposite category of setting a controlled bedroom temperature that is too high, 70 or 72 degrees. 7072. Sleep clinicians treating patients who can't sleep at night will often ask about room temperature, and will advise patients to lower their current thermostat set point by 3 to 5 degrees from that which they currently use. 3.5. Anyone disbelieving of the influence of temperature on sleep can explore some related experiments on this topic. Scientists have, for example, gently warmed the feet or the body of rats to encourage blood to rise to the surface of the skin and release heat, thereby decreasing core body temperature. The rats fell asleep far faster than was otherwise normal. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 0910. Marketers have known for decades that you buy what you see first. You are far more likely to purchase items placed at eye level in the grocery store, for example, than items on the bottom shelf. There is an entire body of research about the way product placement in stores influences your buying behavior. This gives you a chance to use product placement to your advantage. Healthy items like produce are often the least visible foods at home. You won't think to eat what you don't see. This may be part of the reason why 85% of Americans do not eat enough fruits and vegetables. 85%. If produce is hidden in a drawer at the bottom of your refrigerator, these good foods are out of sight and mind. The same holds true for your pantry. I used to have a shelf lined with salty crackers and chips at eye level. When these were the first things I noticed, they were my primary snack foods. That same shelf is now filled with healthy snacks, which makes good decisions easy. Foods that sit out on tables are even more critical. When you see food every time you walk by, you are likely to grab and eat it. So to improve your choices, leave good foods like apples and pistachios sitting out instead of crackers and candy. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 1112. Many high school students study and learn inefficiently because they insist on doing their homework while watching TV or listening to loud music. TV. These same students also typically interrupt their studying with repeated phone calls, trips to the kitchen, video games, and internet surfing. Ironically, students with the greatest need to concentrate when studying are often the ones who surround themselves with the most distractions. These teenagers argue that they can study better with the TV or radio playing. TV. Some professionals actually support their position. They argue that many teenagers can actually study productively under less than ideal conditions because they've been exposed repeatedly to background noise since early childhood. These educators argue that children have become used to the sounds of the TV, video games, and loud music. TV. They also argue that insisting students turn off the TV or radio when doing homework will not necessarily improve their academic performance. TV. This position is certainly not generally shared, however. Many teachers and learning experts are convinced by their own experiences that students who study in a noisy environment often learn inefficiently. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 13-14. Behavioral ecologists have observed clever copying behavior among many of our close animal relatives. One example was uncovered by behavioral ecologists studying the behavior of a small Australian animal called the quill. Its survival was being threatened by the cane toad, an invasive species introduced to Australia in the 1930s. 1930. To a quill, these toads look as tasty as they are poisonous, and the quills who ate them suffered fatal consequences at a speedy rate. Behavioral ecologists identified a clever solution by using quills' instincts to imitate. Scientists fed small groups of quills toad sausages containing harmless but nausea-inducing chemicals, conditioning them to avoid the toads. Groups of these toad-smart quills were then released back into the wild. They taught their own offspring what they'd learned. Other quills copied these constructive behaviors through a process of social learning. As each baby quill learned to keep away from the hazardous toads, the chances of the survival of the whole quill species and not just that of each individual quill were improved. The quills were saved via minimal human interference because ecologists were able to take advantage of quills' natural imitative instincts. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 15-16. A quick look at history shows that humans have not always had the abundance of food that is enjoyed throughout most of the developed world today. In fact, there have been numerous times in history when food has been rather scarce. As a result, people used to eat more when food was available since the availability of the next meal was questionable. Overeating in those times was essential to ensure survival, and humans received satisfaction from eating more than was needed for immediate purposes. On top of that, the highest pleasure was derived from eating the most calorie-dense foods, resulting in a longer-lasting energy reserve. Even though there are parts of the world where, unfortunately, food is still scarce, most of the world's population today has plenty of food available to survive and thrive. However, this abundance is new, and your body has not caught up, still naturally rewarding you for eating more than you need and for eating the most calorie-dense foods. These are innate habits and not simple addictions. They are self-preserving mechanisms initiated by your body, ensuring your future survival, but they are irrelevant now. Therefore, it is your responsibility to communicate with your body regarding the new environment of food abundance and the need to change the inborn habit of overeating. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 17-18. Many advertisements cite statistical surveys. But we should be cautious because we usually do not know how these surveys are conducted. For example, a toothpaste manufacturer once had a poster that said, more than 80% of dentists recommend Smiley toothpaste. 80% Smiley toothpaste. This seems to say that most dentists prefer Smiley toothpaste to other brands. Smiley toothpaste. But it turns out that the survey questions allowed the dentists to recommend more than one brand, and in fact another competitor's brand was recommended just as often as Smiley toothpaste. Smiley toothpaste. No wonder the UK Advertising Standards Authority ruled in 2007 that the poster was misleading and it could no longer be displayed. 2007 Advertising Standards Authority. A similar case concerns a well-known cosmetics firm marketing a cream that is supposed to rapidly reduce wrinkles. But the only evidence provided is that 76% of 50 women agreed. 76%. But what this means is that the evidence is based on just the personal opinions from a small sample with no objective measurement of their skin's condition. Furthermore, we are not told how these women were selected. Without such information, the evidence provided is pretty much useless. Unfortunately, such advertisements are quite typical, and as consumers we just have to use our own judgment and avoid taking advertising claims too seriously. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 1920. Researchers brought two groups of 11-year-old boys to a summer camp at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. 1 Oklahoma Robbers Cave. The boys were strangers to one another and upon arrival at the camp, were randomly separated into two groups. The groups were kept apart for about a week. 1. They swam, camped, and hiked. Each group chose a name for itself, and the boys printed their group's name on their caps and t-shirts. Then the two groups met. A series of athletic competitions were set up between them. Soon, each group considered the other an enemy. Each group came to look down on the other. The boys started food fights and stole various items from members of the other group. Thus, under competitive conditions, the boys quickly drew sharp group boundaries. The researchers next stopped the athletic competitions and created several apparent emergencies whose solution required cooperation between the two groups. One such emergency involved a leak in the pipe supplying water to the camp. The researchers assigned the boys to teams made up of members of both groups. Their job was to look into the pipe and fix the leak. After engaging in several such cooperative activities, the boys started playing together without fighting. Once cooperation replaced competition and the groups stopped to look down on each other, group boundaries melted away as quickly as they had formed. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 2122. Plants are nature's alchemists. They are expert at transforming water, soil, and sunlight into an array of precious substances. Many of these substances are beyond the ability of human beings to conceive. While we were perfecting consciousness and learning to walk on 2 feet, they were, by the same process of natural selection, inventing photosynthesis, the astonishing trick of converting sunlight into food, and perfecting organic chemistry. As it turns out, many of the plants' discoveries in chemistry and physics have served us well. From plants come chemical compounds that nourish and heal and delight the senses. Why would they go to all this trouble? Why should plants bother to devise the recipes for so many complex molecules and then expend the energy needed to manufacture them? Plants can't move, which means they can't escape the creatures that feed on them. A great many of the chemicals plants produce are designed, by natural selection, to compel other creatures to leave them alone, deadly poisons, foul flavors, toxins to confuse the minds of predators. Plants also can't change location or extend their reproductive range without help. Many other of the substances plants make draw other creatures to them by stirring and gratifying their desire. It is this fact of plants' immobility that causes them to make chemicals. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. Unit 19, 1, No 2324. It's reasonable to assume that every adult alive today has, at some point in their life, expressed or heard from someone else a variation of the following. Where did all the time go? I can't believe it's the new year. Time flies. Enjoy it. One day you'll wake up and you'll be 50. 50. While different on the surface, the sentiment behind these phrases is the same. Time feels like it moves faster as we get older. But why does this happen? According to psychologist Robert Ornstein, the speed of time and our perception of it is heavily influenced by how much new information is available for our minds to absorb and process. Robert Ornstein. In essence, the more new information we take in, the slower time feels. This theory could explain in part why time feels slower for children. Assigned the enormous task of absorbing and processing all this new perceptual and sensory information around them, their brains are continuously alert and attentive. Why? Because everything is unfamiliar. Consider the mind of a child. Having experienced so little, the world is a mysterious and fascinating place. Adults and children may live in the same world, but reality for a child is vastly different, full of wonders and curiosities and miraculous little events that most adults ignore. Perhaps this is why we think so fondly about the joy of childhood, that freedom of mind and body before the world becomes familiar and predictable.